to encounter some exhausting experiences. You're going to have some deserts and some valleys and some low days and some sad days and some grieving times and some losing times and some lean days, because all of us are eligible for difficult circumstances. But in spite of the odds that are against this widow, justice was served on her behalf. You may be single and desire to be married. You may be poor and desire to be rich. You may be sick and desire to become well. You may be unemployed or underemployed and desire to be gainfully employed. But the good news, church, is that God can bless you right where you are. God doesn't need your relationship status to change before he blesses you. God doesn't need your socioeconomic status to upgrade before he blesses you. God doesn't need the living conditions of your environment to change before he blesses you. He doesn't need your circumstance and your situation and that psychotic boss and those low-down co-workers to change, but God can bless you right where you are. So the question is, if the judge didn't change, if the judge is still low down, if the judge still neither feared God nor respected man, how was justice granted to this woman? We find the answer in verse number 5. It says, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice so that she will not beat me down with her continual coming. We first found the callous of the fearless judge. Secondly, we want to notice the consistency of a frustrated widow. In 2014, a woman can be widowed and not have to go without. These days, a woman's husband can be deceased and she not be destitute. But during the time of this biblical record, widows depended on society for support. A widow at the time of this passage was subject to the chauvinistic ideologies that governed the social and political culture. So the widow does not have money. She does not have a voice in society. She does not have an advocate to plead her case. All she has is persistence. We find this widow coming to the place where justice is supposed to be served. And she's constantly being turned away. We find this widow coming to the place where she's supposed to be able to find help. And she's constantly being turned away. Verse 4 says, the widow kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. By the second or third time, she had to become annoyed, but she kept coming. Her faith in the system had to have become frustrated, but she kept on coming. She had to have been embarrassed by this point because the judge is making her look bad, but she kept on coming. And if you and I are going to be anything more than we are right now, we're going to have to learn how to keep on going. I know they talk about you. I know they scandalize your name. I know they say you ain't nothing, your children ain't nothing, your parents ain't nothing, and none of you will ever be nothing, but you got to learn how to just keep on going. You want to look at somebody on your road and say, keep on going. I know it's hard, but just keep on going. I know they talk about you and scandalize your name, but keep on going. You may not have all that you think you need, but keep on going. You may not have as much as the person that's sitting next to you, but keep on going. You may not, you may be down to your last, and you may be out and you used to be in, but I come to encourage somebody here at Tucker Baptist that all you got to do is keep on going. James chapter 1 verses 2 and 3. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into divers temptation, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. All James is saying is that you have to have faith in God, and for the people of God, trials are not working against you, trials are working for you. Instead of you complaining about what you're going through, you better get down on your knees and make that trial work for you. Instead of you talking about the people that are talking about you, you better go into the prayer chamber and make that trial work for you. Instead of you crying and sighing and worrying and doubting, you better find the house of prayer and make that trial work for you. Says the trying of our faith, it worketh patience. We find the callous of a fearless judge. Secondly, we find the consistency of a faithful widow. Lastly, I like Jesus so much because he's not like people that will take you to the deep, dark place and leave you in the darkness. But Jesus begins this story by telling us that this is a dark place. This woman has a dark situation. And lastly, he subjects light into this place of darkness. We got the callous of a fearless judge. Darkness. We got the consistency of a frustrated widow who's in darkness. But thirdly, Jesus reveals the certainty of our faithful God. Somebody ought to get happy right there that God is certain. When the banks change on you, when your jobs change on you, when church folk change on you, God, he says, I am the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. And all that simply means is that he won't change on you. Jesus reveals the certainty of our faithful God. Verse number 6, it's here right in the text. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Jesus is saying, if the unrighteous judge will respond to a persistent request, how much more will the righteous judge who sits high and looks low and neither sleeps nor slumber, how much more will he respond? Jesus goes on to verse 8. He says that God will give them justice speedily. But the problem with many of us in this house this morning is that our definition of speedily is different than God's definition of speedily. Isaiah 5 and 55 and 8, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, saith the Lord. Because if it was up to us, we would never go through any trials and any tribulation. If it was up to us, our church home would never have to go without. If it was up to us, our houses would never be the one with an empty freezer and an empty pantry. If it was up to us, we would never cry. If it were up to us, we would never go through dark days. But God says in Isaiah, my ways are not your ways. Even when you do go through callous situations, even when we do find ourselves struggling to sustain, even when we do find ourselves in need of help, Jesus gives us an assurance that God will answer our call. But the problem is, often we don't recognize or understand the move of God that's already happening in our lives. Even when we don't understand, the good news is that the bad news is not the last news. I wish I had somebody that could look back over your life and say, all of my good days outweigh my bad days. When I got bad news, God still was God on the throne. When my days were dark and dreary, God was still on the throne. When my children acted up and my spouse was being low down, my job acted like they wanted to let me go, my neighborhood was being burglarized, God was still on the throne. I like the Bible because you can always find help in the Word. The hymnologist wrote it best when he said, time is filled with swift transition. Not on earth unmoved can stand. But you and I have to build your hopes on things eternal. Yeah, you gotta hold to God's unchanging hand. Because the truth is that times they won't always be good. But the blessing is that times it won't always be bad. The truth is that the sun won't always shine. But the blessing is that the rain won't always fall. The truth is that you won't always have a smile on your face. But the blessing is that the frown won't last always. I like Ecclesiastes because it says there's a time to be born and there's a time to die. There's a time to plant and there's a time to reap. There is a time to heal and there's a time to heal. There's a time to tear down and there's a time to build back up. There's a time in life when you're going to have to cry sometimes. But the blessing is that there's a time when you're going to laugh. There's a time when you're going to mourn. And there's a time when you're going to dance. There's a time to tear apart. And there's a time to put back together. There's a time to love. There is a time to hate. There's a time for war. And there's a time for peace. All I'm trying to tell you is trouble don't last. Don't last always. You can cry right now. But I heard David say, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. Oh, my help comes from the Lord. Have I got a witness here that can look back over your life and say it was the Lord who brought me out of my trial? It was the Lord who pulled me through my circumstance. It was the Lord who made the way out of no way. It was the Lord